So we're just a couple of weeks out from the election. All of the vote counting hasn't even concluded. And so while we would like to be able to draw a lot of lessons about how the election went, why it went that way, why there wasn't this massive landslide, we don't have all of the data necessarily yet to be able to say. But I think we can say with some confidence that it was probably the left's fault that it didn't go better, that we didn't win all those races. It wasn't a massive landslide. It was probably them. Something socialism is the theme of the day. And joining us to answer for her contribution to the massive failure of the Democrats is the executive director of the Justice Democrats, Alexandria Rojas. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, John.
Thank you. Now I'm being very serious right now, except that I'm not. So what I'm alluding to there is that many of the, their elected Dems who had their little phone call complaining that their races were closer, some of them lost, and it has to do with the Green New Deal or defund the police and all of that. I'm sure you've had to talk about this a lot, so I apologize, but what do you make of that argument so far based on the data that we've seen?
Yeah, well, thanks again for having me on. I mean, we actually teamed up with New Deal Strategies, the Sunrise Movement, Data for Progress to release a memo on why we think what went wrong for Democrats in 2020, and totally agree that I think a lot of these sort of assertions of what went wrong and what went right are sort of premature, given that we haven't even gotten all of the election results yet. But given that, we're seeing congressional Democrats in leadership to those that are either have lost or are still, waiting for all of the ballots to be counting in their races, that they, are blaming socialism, they're blaming defund the police. One, an attack that has been levied for decades, another one that just happened this past summer. And what we talked about in the memo was focusing on three main things. One, investing in the base, right? However people have feelings about defund the police, the reality is the reason why we are competitive for two Senate seats in Georgia, and had resounding victories in places like Arizona and Georgia, Philadelphia, right? All of these key swing areas are because of young Black people. Young communities of color across the board, especially Black voters, Latino voters, Native voters out in places like Arizona that are showing out in historic numbers, especially young people, the highest turnout we have seen in generations. And so to sort of immediately vilify the base does not make sense, I think, for a party that's trying to build something long lasting at the base of voters that is delivering key victories. And also, the question that we should be asking is, if we know that these attacks are coming, what are we doing to prepare for them? We know that these are also stokes of racial resentment, right? Socialism, defund the police, and instead of letting the GOP have that lane, right? Because we know that when they occupy it, they're going to fill it with, racist stuff. We have to have our own agenda. I think that, there's plenty of studies that we've also linked to in that memo. And you may have seen it. It's been on Politico and a few other places, and I could send it around afterwards. But it's talking about how we should take on, the GOP's divide and conquer tactics head on, and talk about racial unity and connect it with economic prosperity, and actually run on a real message that is going to improve people's lives, and not just talking about finding common ground or bipartisanship that aren't really things that are going to tangibly make a difference.
Exactly, and arguably are the sorts of campaign themes that other candidates ran on and lost in very high profile, very important Senate races. But we're going to ignore all of that. It was probably
or have been running on for decades, right? Like this strategy has clearly not been working for the Democratic Party for a while. And despite all of that, we still had record turnout, right? On the Republican side, but certainly on the Democratic side, it looks like Joe Biden's going to win by over 5 million votes by the end of this or more. And so we've got an obligation now to not abdicate our responsibility in Democratic leadership to really, champion an agenda and paint a picture of what it's going to look like to improve people's lives, instead of just, sort of scapegoating progressives and activists that are really delivering a lot of key victories in these swing states.
Yeah, and that scapegoating, it certainly did bother me. Like, I feared that the left would be, cast off after the election, but I figured they would at least wait until they make the cabinet to prove to us that they don't need us anymore. But we didn't get that long.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.